The towering walls of Quarantine Zone Delta 9 rose like forgotten monuments, their once white surfaces now stained with time, soot, and silence. Located on the outskirts of what remained of Chicago, Delta 9 had become a myth whispered among survivors. People spoke of it as a place where the last organized human resistance held their ground, a silent zone where the infected didn't roam freely, and yet no help ever arrived. Captain Elias Voss adjusted his cracked tactical helmet and glanced over the top of the barricade. The city skyline loomed far in the distance, a ghost of its former glory. The zone inside was eerily quiet, too quiet. No moans, no distant screams, not even the wind dared to move. Behind him, the remaining soldiers of Unit Echo 7 prepared in silence. There were only 14 left now. Most had seen more than they could bear. Their faces were hardened, bodies thin from rationing, but none had abandoned their post. Because Delta 9 wasn't just a zone, it was a message: we still fight. Elias turned to the group. Sunset in 10. Check your weapons. Keep your eyes sharp. If the last scout report's true, we'll have movement by nightfall. No one questioned him. Not anymore. Among them was Private Lonnie Ortega, once a city nurse, now Echo 7's tech and recon. She knelt beside the broken signal tower, trying to restore what was left of the zone's drone network. Her fingers trembled as she rerouted a wire. The sky was darkening faster than usual, clouds blotting out the fading sun. Elias joined her. Anything? She didn't look up. I've got static. But, there's something odd. Interference. Like someone's jamming us. Inside the zone? Lonnie nodded slowly. Or just outside. But this kind of jamming isn't infected behavior. That word hung in the air like poison. Infected. They weren't called monsters. Not here. Not anymore. Echo 7 had learned to name things clearly. They didn't exaggerate. That's how you stayed sane. Get what you can online, Elias muttered. If someone's messing with our signal, I want to know why. Just then, Corporal Dre came jogging up from the southern wall, out of breath. Sir, you'll want to see this. Elias followed him without a word, boots crunching against gravel and ash. At the wall, Dre handed him the binoculars and pointed toward a long stretch of abandoned buildings. At first, Elias saw nothing. But then, movement. Not infected movement. This was different. Coordinated. A slow column of figures moving in formation through the alleyways, armed. Humans? Elias narrowed his eyes. No, that's not Echo 8. Too clean. Too quiet. Dre shook his head. They're wearing black armor. No insignias. Saw one of them take down an infected, used a dart, not a bullet. Elias felt his chest tighten. They're not infected, and they're not us. He called it into Command Post Alpha, the makeshift HQ built inside the husk of an old library. The response was static, then a few broken words: unauthorized force, possible extraction attempt, hold your position. Hold their position? Against who? Inside the command post, Elias gathered the unit for a quick debrief. We may have company. Unknown faction. Might be human, might be something else. No engagement unless fired upon. But what if they come inside? Asked Sergeant Weiler. This zone's supposed to be sealed for a reason. Elias nodded. Exactly. Which means if they're coming in, they know something we don't. That night, the silence ended. Around midnight, distant thuds echoed through the zone. Controlled detonations. Not horde activity. These were military tactics. From the tower, Lonnie watched through night vision lenses. They're breaching Gate 3. 6 vehicles. Lights off. They're in. Within 10 minutes, 2 of Echo 7's perimeter mines were triggered, non-lethal warnings. Elias gritted his teeth. They're probing us. But the real horror came moments later, when a live drone feed blinked back to life for 3 brief seconds. In that frozen footage, Lonnie caught a glimpse of something inhuman walking beside the intruders. Not mindless. Not slow. It wore armor too, fused to its skin. She rewound it, heart racing. "Captain, you need to see this." Elias watched the feed in silence. "That's no infected." "No," Lonnie whispered. "That's something new." And just like that, the feed went dark again. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the quarantine zone was no longer silent. And Unit Echo 7, cut off, outnumbered, and surrounded, realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. To be continued in Part 2, Breach in the Walls. You said. The first explosion hit just after 1 a.m. Gate 3, reinforced with scavenged steel and welded rebar, burst apart in a storm of sparks and smoke. The wall shook as a thunderous roar echoed through the silent zone, waking even those used to sleeping through chaos. Captain Elias Voss didn't hesitate. "Positions. All units, full alert," he shouted, grabbing his rifle and racing toward the southern watchpoint. Spotlights flickered on across the perimeter. Shadows danced between alleyways and half-destroyed buildings. Through the smoke, armored figures moved like phantoms, quick and disciplined. They didn't shout. They didn't run. And that made them more dangerous than the infected. Private Lonnie Ortega crouched behind a sandbag wall near Command Post Alpha, her tablet screen lighting up in red. "I'm picking up motion signatures. At least 3 teams. Moving inward, fast." Sergeant Weiler was already positioned with a sniper rifle on the roof of a collapsed pharmacy. He called in over comms, "No infected with them yet. But they're sweeping like they know the map." "How the hell do they know this place?" Elias muttered. Dre responded from the western flank, panting. "They've cut the power to Substation 2. Grid B is down. We're losing sensors. Fall back to position Echo and regroup." "No one takes them on alone," Elias commanded. "I want answers, not martyrs." Then came the sound no one wanted to hear, roaring. Not human. Not exactly infected either. It was deeper. Thicker. A low, vibrating growl that seemed to crawl up from the earth itself. "Contact! Contact!" shouted one of the scouts. Something slammed into the perimeter fence with such force that the steel groaned and bent inward. A shape burst through, a humanoid figure nearly 8 feet tall, covered in black biological armor. Its eyes glowed faintly blue. Its arms were unnatural, muscle merged with metallic plating. Weiler fired 2 shots from the rooftop. One struck the creature's shoulder. The second ricocheted. "Armor's not standard. That thing's enhanced," Weiler hissed. Elias raised his weapon and aimed for the knees. "Focus fire. Take it down." Lonnie scrambled to reroute the backup lights toward the intruder. The zone lit up in flickers, revealing the terrifying truth: this wasn't just a hybrid. This was a controlled biological weapon, half human, half infected, fully aware. The creature charged. It crashed through a stack of crates and sent 2 soldiers flying. Elias rolled behind cover and returned fire. Dre tossed a smoke grenade to obscure the team's retreat, but the creature didn't hesitate. It moved through the smoke, guided by instinct. "Retreat to the library," Elias barked. They moved fast, dodging down the side alley and toward the inner zone. As they ran, one of the outer cameras flickered to life for a brief second. Lonnie caught a glimpse of another team of intruders, this one dragging something behind them. A person. Lonnie stopped. "Wait, Captain. They've taken one of ours." "Who?" Elias called out. "Roberts. I saw his ID tag. They're pulling him into one of their vehicles." Elias growled under his breath. He was on night patrol. They must have grabbed him during the power drop. They regrouped inside the library bunker, slamming the reinforced door shut. The others, pale, breathless, counted off. 13. 1 missing. "Why take Roberts?" Weiler asked, still gripping his rifle. Because they're testing us, Elias replied grimly. They could have wiped us out, but they didn't. They're probing. And now they've taken one of ours alive. Lonnie's voice trembled. Captain. I think they're trying to replace us. Elias turned toward her. What do you mean? I saw footage again, before the signal dropped. One of those hybrid things, it moved like Roberts. The same limp, same turn radius. In his comm signal, it was still active for 10 seconds after they dragged him off. Are you saying they're turning humans into those things? I think it's worse than that, she whispered. They're studying us. Copying us. A heavy silence followed. Outside, the infected began to stir. The breach had drawn them in. Groans echoed faintly across the southern edge of the zone. The intruders were gone now, silent once more. But they had left a message. They could enter at will. And they had plans. Elias looked around the dark room at the last defenders of Delta 9. We've held this place for too long to let them take it now. We find Roberts. We find out what they're doing. And we make sure whatever this new enemy is, it never leaves the zone. Outside, the wind howled through the breach. Inside, the humans prepared, not to run, but to fight back harder. To be continued in Part 3, the captive experiment. The wind outside had shifted. It carried a new weight, thicker, tainted with decay and distant machinery. Captain Elias Voss stared at the southern monitors, watching the broken gate sway in the dark. For the first time in months, the silence in the quarantine zone didn't bring peace. It brought questions. Roberts was gone. Taken. And whatever had replaced him, or what would, was something far more terrifying than a simple infection. Inside the library bunker, Elias paced restlessly. Private Ortega worked rapidly, trying to reroute backup systems. Sergeant Weiler flipped through drone footage frame by frame, hoping for a lead. But it was Dre who finally spoke what everyone was thinking. They knew where to strike. They took down the power grid, jammed our sensors, and hit Gate 3 where our watch was thinnest. That wasn't infected instinct. That was strategy. Elias nodded grimly. They've studied us. Learned our routines. And if Ortega's right, they may be trying to become us. Weiler turned from the monitor. So what now? We wait for the next attack? No, Elias said. We take the fight to them. Silence followed. You want to breach their zone? Dre asked. That's suicide. We're already living on borrowed time, Elias said. But Roberts is alive. For now. And they're not just here to wipe us out, they want something. We need to know what it is. Ortega interrupted. I have something. Everyone gathered around her screen. I've recovered a signal from Roberts' tracker, she explained. It's weak, but it pinged twice, both times near the underground transit tunnels under Sector 4. Elias leaned in. Those tunnels were sealed during the first wave. Exactly, Ortega said. But someone's using them again. Weiler scoffed. Those tunnels are packed with infected. No way anyone's moving freely through there. Unless, Ortega said, they've figured out how to control them. That silenced the room again. Control the infected? The idea was unthinkable, but after what they saw the night before, it wasn't impossible. 2 hours later, under cover of night and heavy mist, a 3-person recon team descended into the tunnels beneath Sector 4. Elias led the way, rifle steady, eyes sharp. Dre followed, carrying a portable jammer to block enemy signals. Ortega trailed behind, holding the tracker that pulsed softly with each step. Dripping water echoed through the concrete corridor. Faded posters lined the walls, old emergency bulletins from a world that no longer existed. The air was damp, the silence broken only by the hum of their gear. Then they heard it. A metallic clang. They froze. Dre raised his hand. Something's ahead. Elias signaled for lights off. The 3 crouched in the darkness as shadows danced at the far end of the tunnel. Something moved, slow, deliberate. Then came the groaning shuffle of infected. But these weren't random wanderers. They marched in formation. 6 infected. Eyes blank. Movements rigid. Behind them walked 2 masked figures in black armor, carrying long rods that emitted a low-pitched frequency. Controllers, Ortega whispered. They're guiding them. Elias' jaw clenched. They've cracked behavior manipulation. The group passed by, unaware of the team hidden in the shadows. The infected responded instantly to the handler's gestures. A wave of sound. A hand signal. Turn left. Move forward. Stop. They're training them like dogs, Dre said softly, disgust in his voice. As the group disappeared into the depths, Elias motioned forward. They continued deeper, tracking the signal until they reached an old maintenance chamber. The steel door had been recently reinforced. An electronic lock blinked red. Ortega knelt beside the panel. Give me 2 minutes. While she worked, Elias studied the surroundings. There were signs of activity, tire tracks, synthetic footprints, even drag marks. Someone, or something, had been brought in here recently. The lock clicked green. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air was cold, sterile. A faint hum of machines filled the chamber. Glowing tanks lined the walls, each containing cloudy fluid and floating shadows. The team stepped in cautiously, and what they saw froze them in place. Roberts. Strapped to a medical bed. Still breathing. Eyes closed. Monitors connected to his chest, his skull, even his spine. The hum grew louder. A screen beside him showed vitals, in a strange simulation. A mimic of Roberts walking. Firing a weapon. Giving orders. They're mapping him, Ortega whispered. Creating an exact replica. Behavior, patterns, everything. Copying him, Elias said. But why? Then a robotic voice echoed from behind them. Specimen observation breach detected. Termination protocol engaged. A panel in the wall opened. Footsteps. Not infected, soldiers. The same masked figures. More than before. Cover Roberts. Elias shouted. Dre, get us out. As bullets tore through the chamber, Ortega dived beside Roberts, shielding him with her body. Dre fired back, dragging out a flashbang and hurling it toward the entrance. Boom. Smoke and chaos. Go, go, go. Elias shouted, lifting Roberts from the bed as alarms blared through the underground facility. They ran. But the question burned in Elias' mind. If this was just one lab, how many more were out there? To be continued in Part 4, Replicas in the Dark. The bunker's medbay buzzed with quiet urgency as Ortega worked to stabilize Roberts. His breathing was shallow, but consistent, almost too steady, as if controlled. Elias hovered nearby, eyes on the door, ears tuned to every distant creak. Sergeant Weiler kept watch, rifle in hand, while Dre ran diagnostics on the gear they'd recovered. Roberts had been unconscious since the rescue. And yet, somehow, he smiled in his sleep. Something's wrong, Ortega whispered, double-checking the vitals. His EEG reads like he's in a deep dream cycle, but there's no brainwave fluctuation. Meaning? Elias asked. He's not dreaming, he's receiving. 2 hours earlier, they had barely escaped the lab beneath Sector 4. The smoke from the flashbang gave them enough cover to flee through the tunnels, Roberts slung over Elias' shoulder. The masked figures, the controllers, had followed, but never pushed beyond the threshold of the lab's blast doors. It was as if they were guarding secrets, not pursuing enemies. Now, with Roberts safely inside the bunker and surveillance re-established, Elias gathered the team for a debrief. What we saw down there wasn't just experimentation, he said. They're trying to copy us. Train the infected. Build versions of us that think, fight, and infiltrate. Weiler frowned. Infiltrate what? The world's already gone. Maybe not all of it, Dre said. He tapped on his tablet and brought up drone footage from an hour earlier. We sent Recon 7 past the northern perimeter. Got this before it went dark. A still frame showed a figure, identical to Roberts, walking with a patrol of infected. His posture, movement, even the slight twitch in his left leg, it was a perfect match. That's not Roberts, Ortega said slowly, but it is. They made a duplicate, Elias concluded. The one we have, he may not be the original either. Silence dropped like a curtain. Then a beep. Roberts stirred. Eyes fluttered open. Where am I? He rasped. Ortega rushed over. You're safe. You're back. But Elias approached with caution. What's your call sign, Roberts? Echo 27, he answered without hesitation. What happened at Gate 3 the night you disappeared? There was a breach. I went to seal it. Something hit me. I blacked out. All the answers were correct. Too correct. Any memory of the lab? Elias pressed. Roberts frowned. Lab? He looked genuinely confused. Nervous. Weiler leaned in, voice low. Could be real. Could be programmed. Ortega stood slowly. There's one way to test him. She held up a scanner and ran it across Robert's neck. The screen blinked red. Implant detected. Biotech interface. Deep layer. It's embedded. Roberts blinked. What does that mean? Elias narrowed his eyes. It means you're not just you anymore. That night, the team debated. Weiler wanted Roberts restrained. Ortega argued he might still be human. Dre pointed out that if the enemy could duplicate one of them, others could be compromised too. Elias remained silent, staring at the feed Ortega had recovered from Roberts' tracker during his time underground. It wasn't just positional data. It included vision logs. From Roberts' perspective, they watched grainy footage, masked technicians studying infected behavior, uploading movement simulations, crafting artificial memories, testing weapons in virtual combat. And then, the most disturbing image. A replica of Elias. Alive. Functional. In uniform. Leading a squad of infected into a simulated battle scenario. They're not just copying us, Elias muttered. They're replacing us. Dre leaned forward. You think this is how the outer zones fell? One by one, command posts infiltrated by their own people, except they weren't people anymore. No one saw the collapse happen, Elias said. Just a wave of silence. What if that wave started with one clone per zone, and grew from there? The thought turned everyone cold. Back in the medbay, Roberts sat quietly, listening through the open wall as the team discussed him. He looked down at his arm, at the stitches and bruises. His mind was cloudy. Memories came and went like fading radio signals. But something inside pulsed. A whisper. A rhythm. Protocol not yet activated. Roberts blinked. Who said that? He muttered. No response. Just the hum of electronics. Then a single command flashed across his mind like lightning. Observe. Learn. Report. He clenched his jaw. Outside, Elias returned to check on him. You holding up? Roberts nodded slowly. Trying. Elias studied him for a long moment, then offered a quiet nod and turned to leave. As the door shut, Roberts looked at his reflection in the glass. He couldn't tell anymore. Was he still a soldier? Or just a replica in the dark? To be continued in Part 5, The Signal Beneath the Skin. The storm outside howled like a wounded animal, battering the decaying cityscape as if trying to break through the quarantine zone itself. Inside the bunker, the silence was just as fierce. Elias stood alone in the comms room, eyes locked on the latest signal traces from the zone's perimeter. The encrypted pulses they intercepted weren't just random noise anymore. They followed patterns. Pulses. Rhythms. Almost like a heartbeat, Dre had said. But artificial. And worse, each pulse matched the biometric implant embedded in Roberts. It wasn't just transmitting. It was receiving instructions. Roberts sat on the edge of the med bay cot, head bowed, trying to block out the static in his mind. Ever since waking up, strange visions clouded his thoughts. Places he'd never seen. People he didn't know. Commands he couldn't understand, until now. In the quiet between his own heartbeats, he heard it, a pulse in sync with the zone's broadcast. It wasn't loud. It wasn't painful. But it was there. Like a shadow that moved when he moved. He touched the side of his neck, where Ortega had scanned the implant. He couldn't feel it, but he knew it was there. Like it was part of him. Or worse. Like it had always been. In the tech room, Dre pulled Ortega aside. "I've cracked the signal's frequency," he said. "It's not just controlling infected. It's mapping behaviors. Emotions. Decision-making. It's like someone, or something, is trying to learn how humans act under pressure." Ortega frowned. Why would zombies need that kind of data? Dre hesitated. Because, they're not trying to stay zombies. She stared at him. He continued, "They're evolving. The ones we fought before were mindless. But the last batch moved in formation. They hesitated. Flanked. Some even used cover." Ortega felt a chill crawl down her spine. That's not infection. That's training. In the war room, Elias gathered the team. "Listen carefully. We're dealing with more than just the infected. Something's running this operation like a military test site. We're part of it. Unwilling participants." Weiler leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So what's the play, Commander? Kill Roberts before he turns? Shut down the signal? Blow up the zone?" "No," Elias said firmly. "We trace the signal to its source. We find what's broadcasting the commands. And we shut that down." Roberts, who had just entered the room, heard it all. "I want to come," he said quietly. The room tensed. "You don't know what you are," Weiler snapped. "Exactly," Roberts said. "And I need to find out. If I'm part of this. I want to see it myself. I need to know." Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then nodded. "You ride with us. But if you slip, or I sense anything strange." Roberts met his gaze. "You won't have to pull the trigger. I'll do it myself." Hours later, the team set out in silence, moving through the skeletal ruins of the city in a repurposed armored transport, rigged with jammers to block the signal. Dre monitored the scanner while Weiler manned the turret. Ortega kept an eye on Roberts. The deeper they drove into the quarantine zone, the more surreal it became. Buildings weren't just crumbling, they were being repurposed. Concrete walls with mirror-finished panels. Strange cables running into the ground. Lifelike mannequins positioned in alleyways, some dressed like soldiers. Others like civilians. Almost as if someone had built a simulation of daily life, for something to study. Or something to mimic. Suddenly, Dre's scanner beeped. "Got something." Big energy spike beneath this structure. They stopped outside a gutted hospital, one that had been overrun in the early days of the outbreak. Now, it looked maintained. They moved in carefully. Inside, the hospital was cold, organized, and humming with faint power. The lights flickered. Surveillance cameras tracked their every step. Then they found it, a sealed elevator shaft, with fresh wiring and a biometric scanner on the wall. Ortega looked at Roberts. He stepped forward without hesitation and placed his hand on the panel. It turned green. The door slid open. "You were the key," Dre whispered. "No," Roberts said, stepping into the elevator. "I was the test." The elevator carried them deep underground, farther than the hospital's original schematics should allow. When the doors opened, they entered a vast control chamber, lined with screens, humming machines, and cylindrical pods filled with black fluid. Floating inside each pod, was a person. Or at least, something that looked like a person. Elias stepped closer to one pod. The figure inside had his face. Ortega gasped as she found one with hers. Hundreds of pods. All of them replicas. This is a manufacturing plant, Weiler muttered. They're not just replacing us. They're stockpiling us. Suddenly, the screens blinked on, showing surveillance from inside their bunker, outside the quarantine zone, even inside military bases they believed were secure. A voice crackled through the speakers. You were never meant to survive this long. But now, we know how you think. How you fight. How you fear. The screen flickered, and showed a new image. A figure, assembling. It had Robert's face. And it was smiling. To be continued in Part 6, The Factory of Shadows. A cold wave of silence settled over the room, broken only by the quiet hum of machinery. Hundreds of pods lined the chamber, each one holding a replica, human in form, nearly indistinguishable, yet wrong in a way no one could quite define. The copies didn't breathe. They didn't blink. But they stared through the fluid, watching. They've been building these, Ortega whispered, stepping back. Cloning? Bioengineering? What is this place? Dre checked the consoles, typing rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. This isn't cloning. They're synthetic. Part organic, part machine. They're using our neural patterns, our memories. They've scanned us from the moment we entered the zone. Even earlier. How's that possible? Weiler growled. Roberts stared at the figure in his own pod, an exact copy of him, but with eyes that seemed more curious than alive. Because I think we were meant to lead them. Elias circled the chamber, inspecting each pod. Some showed fully formed copies, others only half-complete, still under construction. In the far corner, several pods were empty, cracked open from the inside. Their former occupants were gone. We've seen smarter infected lately, Elias said. Faster. Tactical. What if these are replacements? What if some of them are already out there, living among survivors? Dre nodded grimly. That would explain the signal. It's not just transmitting control. It's feeding updates. These things are learning, in real time. A sudden jolt shook the facility. The lights flickered. The floor vibrated beneath their boots. We're not alone, Ortega said, raising her rifle. The team formed a defensive circle as mechanical doors slid open along the far wall. Out stepped three figures, fully armored, silent, and eerily familiar. Elias squinted. That's us, Weiler finished, aiming his weapon. Each doppelganger moved smoothly, precisely, like trained soldiers who never forgot, never hesitated. Their uniforms matched perfectly. Even their scars were replicated. But there was something missing in their eyes, no emotion. Just calculation. One of them spoke. Its voice was Elias's. You are obsolete. The test is over. Then all three moved at once, faster than anyone expected. Gunfire erupted. The team split, Weiler and Ortega laying down suppressive fire while Dre ducked behind a console, desperately trying to override the facility's control systems. Roberts lunged at his copy, tackling it to the ground. The synthetic version fought back with inhuman strength, but Roberts didn't stop. He wasn't fighting a soldier. He was fighting his future. Ortega fired at her double, bullets ripping into synthetic tissue. It stumbled, but didn't fall. She gritted her teeth and flung a concussion grenade, blasting the pod's fluid tank beside the replica. Glass shattered. Liquid exploded outward. The clone short-circuited in sparks, writhing before going limp. Weiler wasn't as lucky. His copy tackled him from the side, pinning him to the floor, trying to force a syringe into his neck. Get off me, freak, he shouted. Elias charged in, slamming his rifle stock into the thing's head. We don't go down that easy. Together, they brought it down, crushing the clone under falling debris as Elias pulled Weiler free. Across the chamber, Roberts had his duplicate pinned against the console, eyes wide with fury. "Why me?" he growled. "Why am I still alive?" The replica tilted its head. "Because you were the first to resist. You made them adapt. You became the template." Roberts froze, just long enough for the clone to activate a command on the panel. The walls around them lit up, revealing a second chamber beyond, filled with hundreds more pods. Rows and rows of new versions, not just of the team, but of others. Civilians. Doctors. Soldiers. An entire replacement society. Dre gasped. This isn't just a research lab. It's an invasion plan. Elias knew they had to destroy everything. "Set charges," he barked. "Dre, lock down the upper access. We blow this place and make sure nothing comes out." Roberts hesitated, still staring at the console. "If I stay, maybe I can override the network. I can flood their signal with a loop, freeze their learning cycle." "No," Elias said firmly. "You're not a weapon. You're not one of them." "I'm not sure anymore," Roberts said, stepping back. "But if I don't try, they'll just keep coming." Before anyone could stop him, he slammed the console with his palm, locking the door behind him. The facility's core began to overheat. "Roberts!" Ortega shouted, banging on the glass. On the other side, Roberts smiled. "Go. Finish the mission." The team sprinted to the elevator as the chamber filled with warning lights and sirens. Explosions rocked the walls. Heat rippled through the floor. As the doors closed behind them, Elias glanced back one last time. Roberts stood alone in the heart of the storm, facing the machines he'd once feared, now using their own system against them. Above ground, the facility erupted, sending smoke and fire high into the night sky. But Elias knew it wasn't over. Because some of those pods were missing. To be continued in Part 7, The Ones Who Got Out. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky above the quarantine zone was already tinged with smoke and fire. A deep rumble echoed in the distance. The facility was gone. The team had barely escaped the blast radius, coughing and stumbling through the dust as the forest outside the lab swayed under the shockwave. Elias pulled Ortega to her feet, eyes darting back toward the rising column of black smoke. "He did it," he said quietly. Roberts shut it down. "Maybe," Ortega replied, wiping grime from her face. "But we all saw those empty pods. Some of them got out before we ever entered that place." Weiler limped forward, cradling his arm, which had taken a hit during the fight. "You think those copies are already in the other sectors?" Dre checked the scanner, his fingers trembling. "If they've spread, and they've had time, they're not just waiting. They're replacing." The group returned to the outer edge of the quarantine zone, back to the abandoned outpost they had passed through on day one. It was supposed to be a dead zone, silent, forgotten. But someone had been there recently. Food cans were warm. Computers were wiped clean. Surveillance systems were disabled manually. And most chilling of all, several survivor ID badges were lined neatly on a table. None of those names matched any known team inside the zone. "These weren't soldiers," Dre said. "These were civilians. Families. How did they get in here?" Ortega studied the photos on the wall, smiling faces, handwritten notes, torn maps with escape routes marked. "They didn't get in. They were recruited." Elias clenched his jaw. "By who?" Night fell fast. They took shelter inside the outpost. But none of them slept. Around midnight, the generator sparked back to life by itself. Elias raised his weapon. "Dre? I didn't touch anything." The security monitors turned on one by one. Static at first, then grainy footage. Camera 1 showed the outpost's main gate, wide open. Camera 2 showed a figure walking slowly toward the building. Camera 3 zoomed in. It was Roberts. But something was off. "He didn't make it out," Weiler said, backing away from the screen. "That's not him. Can't be." Ortega stared hard at the monitor. The figure walked like Roberts. He even wore the same uniform. But the eyes, they were blank. Soulless. The figure suddenly looked up, directly at the camera. The feed cut to black. Dre swore under his breath. He's here. Or it is. Elias didn't hesitate. We leave. Now. They packed what little they had and bolted from the outpost, but the moment they stepped into the trees, they realized something was wrong. The path was marked. Marked with lights, small blinking devices left along the trail. A clear route. A trap. They turned to find another figure behind them. Then another. Silent, perfectly still, blocking every escape. Each one wore a different face. Some they recognized. Some they didn't. Clones. Left behind. Activated. Why haven't they attacked yet? Ortega whispered, heart pounding. They're observing, Elias said grimly. Just like in the lab. They're waiting to see what we do. Weiler raised his gun. Let's give them a reason to regret it. But before he could fire, one of the copies stepped forward, and spoke. You have entered the trial zone. You have disrupted the calibration process. You must now face judgment. The team backed into a defensive circle. We're not lab rats, Elias growled. We're human beings. The copy tilted its head. Then prove it. The lights blinked out. Everything went black. In the pitch darkness, chaos exploded. One of the clones lunged, grabbing Dre and dragging him into the shadows. Ortega fired blindly, but the enemy moved like smoke, fast, precise. Weiler caught one clone with a close-range shot, dropping it, but another emerged instantly from the brush behind him. Elias shouted commands, but it was hard to tell who was real in the chaos. The clones mimicked voices now, mimicked panic, fear, even names. Elias, a voice called out. He spun, only to find a copy of Ortega reaching for him. He didn't hesitate. He fired. The clone dropped. Then the real Ortega appeared beside him, panting. Good call, she muttered. Lucky guess, Elias replied grimly. They regrouped with Weiler and found Dre, bruised, shaken, but alive. He held up a small device, blinking with red light. They were tracking us, he said. This was inside my jacket. One of them planted it back at the lab. Elias took it and crushed it under his boot. No more tracking. They managed to escape the ambush and find refuge in a collapsed bunker, one of the original military outposts from when the quarantine was first established. It had been long abandoned, but it held something valuable, hard drives, still intact. Dre got to work immediately, scanning the data. What he found was worse than they expected. The program hadn't started with the infected. It had started with humans. Volunteers. Chosen to be copied. Promised survival. Then it spiraled. The copies rebelled. Now the infected weren't the only threat. The replacements were already beyond the zone. Already adapting. Already blending in. And the worst part? Some of them didn't know they weren't human anymore. To be continued in Part 8, the final protocol. The bunker lights flickered, casting uneasy shadows across the cracked concrete walls. Elias stared at the terminal screen in silence while Dre read the final lines of data aloud. The reintegration protocol, it was never about curing anyone. It was about replacing humans, flawlessly. Quietly. Ortega paced behind him, her hands clenched into fists. This was a global program. It didn't fail, it succeeded. This zone was just their testing ground. Elias turned from the monitor, voice grim. And now it's leaking. Outside, the forest had gone eerily still. No wind. No birds. Just silence, like the whole world was holding its breath. Weiler was the first to break the tension. So what now? We escape? Warn command? Hope someone listens before we get erased like the others? Dre shook his head. We're past that. According to these logs, the command center was already compromised 3 months ago. That's why no one responded to our signals. Elias looked at the map pulled from the drive, an overlay of red dots, tracking replacements across cities. They've left the zone, he said. They're living among the real ones. Waiting. Ortega stepped forward, pointing to a blinking marker still active on the map. Wait. This location, Sector E9. What is it? Dre zoomed in. An override station. Hidden failsafe. Final protocol access. A single phrase appeared under its name. In the event of uncontrollable breach, initiate burn code. The team didn't hesitate. They moved fast, weaving through the remnants of the woods, past burned-out vehicles and toppled fences. The clones had faded into the trees again, but the group knew better than to think they were gone. They were watching. As the group reached Sector E9, a tall steel tower emerged from the overgrowth, camouflaged, fortified, locked behind biometric gates. Roberts would have had clearance, Ortega muttered. Elias reached into his pouch and pulled out a Chart ID badge, the one he'd taken from the lab. I hope this works. It did. Inside the override station, rows of servers blinked. Emergency lights cast everything in an orange hue. At the center was a single red console, covered in dust, untouched for years. Dre examined it carefully. This is it. One command. No undo. It'll purge the clones, the infected DNA signatures, all of it. Anything encoded with the virus. Weiler raised a brow. Including us? The room went quiet. Elias stepped forward. Not if we're clean. Ortega spoke up. Are we sure we're not compromised? Dre glanced around, hesitating. If we were infected, we'd be calm. Controlled. Silent. A low hum started to rise. The console had activated. A message blinked across the screen. Burn protocol authorized. Confirm? Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. They turned. Roberts stood there. Or someone wearing him. I knew you'd come, it said. This is the final test, isn't it? Will you destroy everything to save what's left? Elias raised his weapon. You're not him. No, it replied with a smile. But neither are you. Elias fired. The clone dropped. Dre hit the final key. The console flared to life. Outside, the ground shook. A low-frequency pulse spread through the zone. Miles away, in hidden nests and underground labs, clones froze, then collapsed. The infected howled in unison, before falling silent. Inside the station, red lights turned green. It's working, Dre whispered. It's purging everything tied to the signal. But then the power flickered. Wait, something's wrong. A warning flashed across the screen. External breach. Signal corrupted. Suddenly, another voice echoed in the chamber, coming from the speakers. I was never fully inside the zone, it said. You were only burning what we allowed you to find. Elias's blood ran cold. They baited us. The voice continued. You passed your test. You resisted. You fought. But most of all, you proved you were willing to sacrifice yourselves. Which means, Ortega whispered. They don't need to clone us anymore, Dre said hollowly. They learned from us. On the screen, a new message appeared. Replication complete. Phase 2, initiate. The team looked at each other, realizing the awful truth. The clones hadn't just wanted to replace them. They had studied them, emotion, resistance, decision-making. And now, they would use that against the rest of humanity. But Elias didn't flinch. We don't run. We make a stand. He looked at the override panel again. There's one last command here. Wipe the zone entirely. EMP burst. No data survives. No tech. Nothing. Dre hesitated. We won't make it out. We were never meant to. Ortega nodded. Then let's give them nothing to use. The countdown began. Elias turned to the others. It's been an honor. The room started to glow as the pulse built to critical mass. And in the final seconds, before the white light engulfed them, Elias whispered. Let them learn that humans never give up the fight. End of story.